The cap felt too tight on my head as I adjusted it for the 100th time, my hands trembling slightly as I watched my classmates line up for the procession. Desert Valley Community College's gymnasium had been transformed with purple and gold banners, folding chairs arranged in perfect rows, and a makeshift stage where we'd all walk across in 15 minutes. The air conditioning struggled against the Arizona heat and the excitement of 300 families packed into the space, creating a humid buzz of anticipation and nervous energy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Aaliyah Rodriguez, and I never thought I'd make it this far. 2 years ago, I was sleeping on my cousin Diego's couch, working double shifts at a fast food drive-thru, and trying to figure out how someone like me could possibly afford college. Today, I was graduating summa cum laude with a degree in computer science, 0 GPA, and acceptance letters to transfer programs at universities I'd only dreamed about. But as I watched my family settling into their seats in the third row, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. My father, Marcus, had driven down from Tucson, taking time off from his construction job to be here. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, wearing the same navy suit he'd worn to my high school graduation, his weathered face beaming with pride. Aunt Carmen had brought homemade cookies and was already tearing up, whispering excitedly to anyone who would listen about how I was the first Rodriguez to graduate college. Cousin Diego had his phone out, ready to record everything, grinning like he'd accomplished something himself. And then there was my mother. Patricia Rodriguez sat at the end of the row, her arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line that I'd learned to recognize as disapproval. She wore a black dress that seemed more appropriate for a funeral than a celebration, and her dark hair was pulled back so severely it stretched the skin around her eye. While everyone else chattered with excitement, she sat in silence, checking her watch every few minutes as if she had somewhere more important to be. The relationship between my mother and me had been complicated for as long as I could remember. She'd had me when she was 19, and my father had disappeared before I was born. She'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, and I'd grown up understanding that life was about survival, not dreams. When I'd told her I wanted to go to college, she'd laughed and said I should focus on finding a man who could provide for me instead of wasting time on books. When I'd saved enough money from working at the restaurant to enroll in community college, she'd called it a phase. When I'd made the dean's list my first semester, she'd suggested the classes must be easier than real college. Nothing I did was ever good enough. Every A was dismissed as grade inflation. Every scholarship was luck. Every achievement was somehow less than it appeared. I'd learned to celebrate my victories quietly, sharing them with my father and aunt, but keeping them from my mother to avoid the inevitable deflation that followed. But today was supposed to be different. Today was supposed to be the day she finally saw what I'd accomplished. The day she realized that her daughter wasn't just surviving but thriving. I'd been so naive. Dr. Peterson, our program coordinator, appeared at my elbow with a clipboard and a warm smile. "Aaliyah, there you are. I wanted to catch you before we begin." She was a small woman in her 50s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I just got off the phone with the admissions office at Stanford. They wanted me to tell you that your transfer application has been moved to priority review. Apparently, your project submission caught their attention." My heart skipped. The project she was referring to was something I'd been working on for months. A machine learning algorithm that could predict and prevent cyber attacks in real time. I'd submitted it as part of my application to several universities, but I'd never expected it to generate this kind of interest. Priority review. They want to schedule a video call with you next week to discuss a full scholarship opportunity. Aaliyah, this is incredible. In 15 years of teaching, I've never seen a community college student receive this kind of attention from Stanford. She squeezed my arm. Your family must be so proud. I glanced back at my family, where my mother was now scrolling through her phone, apparently bored by the proceeding. Some of them are. Dr. Peterson followed my gaze and her expression softened. Family dynamics can be complicated, but what you've achieved here stands on its own merit. Don't let anyone diminish that. She checked her watch. We should line up. It's time. The processional music began, and we filed into the gymnasium to thunderous applause. I found my mother in the crowd as we walked, hoping to see some sign of pride or excitement on her face. Instead, she looked like she was enduring a dental procedure, clapping politely but mechanically, her expression unchanged. The ceremony itself was a blur of speeches and recognition. When they called my name for summa cum laude honors, the applause was enthusiastic, and I could hear Aunt Carmen whooping from the audience. I walked across the stage, shook hands with the dean, and accepted my certificate with a smile that felt both genuine and fragile. For a moment, looking out at my family, I felt the validation I'd been seeking my entire life. That feeling lasted exactly 37 minutes. After the ceremony, families gathered in the courtyard for photos and celebration. The desert sun was relentless, but nobody seemed to mind as graduates posed with their diplomas and loved ones snapped pictures. I was standing with my father and Diego, showing them my certificate, when I heard my mother's voice cutting through the happy chatter around us. "Oh please." She cheated her way through. The words hit me like a physical blow. I turned to see my mother talking to Mrs. Valdez, our neighbor, who had come to congratulate me. Several other family friends had gathered around, and they all turned to look at my mother with expressions of confusion and discomfort. "Patricia," my father said quietly, a warning in his voice, but my mother was just getting started. "You don't go from barely passing high school to graduating with honors without cutting corners. I know my daughter, she's always looked for the easy way out of everything." She gestured dismissively in my direction. "Community college isn't real college anyway. They probably give these honors to anyone who shows up." The small crowd around us had grown larger. Other graduates and their families were starting to notice the commotion. I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger, my hands beginning to shake as I clutched my diploma. This was supposed to be my moment, my day, and she was destroying it in front of everyone who mattered to me. "Mom, stop," I said, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. She turned to me with the same look of disdain she'd perfected over the years. "What? It's not like it's a secret. You think I don't know about all the study groups and tutoring sessions? Getting other people to do your work for you isn't an accomplishment, Mija. It's cheating." The study groups she was referring to were something I'd organized myself, bringing together struggling students to work through difficult concepts together. The tutoring sessions were ones where I'd been the tutor, helping classmates understand programming languages and mathematical concepts that came naturally to me. I'd spent countless hours explaining algorithms and debugging code for other students, often staying up until 2 in the morning to make sure everyone in my study group understood the material before exams. But in my mother's mind, any collaboration was cheating. Any help given or received was evidence of weakness or dishonesty. She'd always believed that success should be a solitary struggle, and the fact that I'd built a community of learners around myself was proof that I couldn't handle the work alone. "You don't know what you're talking about," I said, finding my voice but still speaking too quietly for anyone but the immediate circle to hear. "Don't I?" My mother's voice got louder, attracting even more attention. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know that people like us don't get honors degrees? That girls from our neighborhood don't get perfect grades without cheating? Wake up, Aaliyah. The system is rigged, and you rigged it right back." The courtyard had gone almost silent around us. I could feel dozens of eyes on me watching this public humiliation unfold. My classmates, people I'd studied with for 2 years, people who knew exactly how hard I'd worked, were witnessing my mother tear down everything I'd accomplished. Some looked sympathetic, others uncomfortable, but all of them were seeing me reduced to nothing by the person who was supposed to love and support me most. Dr. Peterson appeared at my side, her face flushed with anger. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," my mother replied coolly. "I'm just being honest about what this really is. Everyone wants to pretend that hard work always pays off, that anyone can succeed if they just try hard enough. But that's not reality. Reality is that some people cheat, and some people get lucky, and sometimes those people end up with pieces of paper that don't mean anything." She looked directly at me as she said this last part, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never noticed before. It wasn't just disappointment or skepticism, it was fear. She was afraid that if I succeeded, it would mean that her own failures were her fault. She was afraid that if someone like me could earn a degree with honors, it would invalidate the story she'd been telling herself about why her own dreams had never materialized. But in that moment, standing in the desert sun with my diploma in my hands and my achievements being dismissed as fraud in front of everyone I cared about, I didn't have the perspective to understand her fear. All I could feel was the crushing weight of her words. The public humiliation of having my proudest moment turned into evidence of my unworthiness. My father stepped forward, his face darker than I'd ever seen it. "Patricia, that's enough. You're embarrassing yourself and you're hurting your daughter." "I'm telling the truth," she replied. "Someone has to." Aunt Carmen moved to my other side, wrapping her arm around my shoulders. "Mija, don't listen to her. We're all proud of you, but the damage was done." The celebration around us had resumed, but it felt hollow now. People were avoiding eye contact, unsure how to respond to what they'd witnessed. My classmates drifted away, probably relieved that their own family drama wasn't playing out in public. The joy I'd felt walking across the stage had evaporated, replaced by a familiar feeling of not being good enough, of having to prove myself over and over again only to have my efforts dismissed. I excused myself and walked to my car, needing space to process what had just happened. The parking lot was mostly empty, other families having moved on to restaurants and private celebrations. I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic, still wearing my cap and gown, and tried to understand how something I'd worked so hard for could be destroyed so quickly by someone who was supposed to love me. My phone buzzed with a text from Diego. "Don't let her get to you. We all know the truth." Another from my father. "I'm sorry, Mija. She's wrong, so wrong." And one from Dr. Peterson. "Please don't let this diminish what you've accomplished. Can we talk on Monday?" I appreciated their support, but it felt like trying to rebuild a house after a hurricane with kind words and good intentions. The foundation had been shaken, and I wasn't sure how to restore it. As I sat there, I thought about all the nights I'd spent coding until my eyes burned, all the mathematics problems I'd worked through until I understood them completely, all the projects I'd completed not just to pass, but to truly master the material. I thought about the machine learning algorithm I'd developed.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The one that was apparently interesting enough to get Stanford's attention. I thought about the study groups where I'd helped other students understand concepts that challenged them, and how rewarding it had been to see their faces light up when something finally clicked. None of that was cheating, none of that was taking shortcuts or getting lucky. It was work, real work. The kind of sustained effort that transforms not just grades but understanding, not just performance but capability. But sitting in that parking lot, with the echoes of my mother's words still ringing in my ears, I felt like maybe she was right. Maybe I was fooling myself. Maybe someone like me didn't belong at Stanford or any other prestigious university. Maybe the best I could hope for was this associate degree and a job that paid better than fast food but not by much. My phone rang, interrupting my spiral of self-doubt. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a Massachusetts area code. "Hello?" I answered, my voice still shaky from the confrontation. "Is this Aaliyah Rodriguez?" "Yes, this is Dr. Elizabeth Hayes from Harvard University. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I sat up straighter, my heart suddenly pounding. "No, not at all. I'm calling because your research project caught our attention. The machine learning application you developed for cybersecurity prediction is exactly the kind of innovative work we're looking for in our computer science program. I know you've applied to several schools for transfer, but I wanted to reach out personally to discuss some opportunities we might have for you here at Harvard." I was quiet for so long that she asked if I was still there. "I'm here," I managed. This is unexpected." "I imagine it is. Listen, I know it's your graduation day, and you're probably celebrating with family, but would you be available for a call early next week? We'd like to discuss a full scholarship opportunity, and potentially a position as a research assistant on a project that aligns perfectly with your work." Harvard, full scholarship, research assistant. The words felt surreal after what had just happened in the court. "Yes," I said, finding my voice. "Yes, I'd be very interested in discussing that." "Wonderful, my assistant will send you some information, and we'll schedule a formal conversation. But Aaliyah, I want you to know that what you've accomplished is remarkable. Community college students rarely produce research of this caliber. You should be very proud." After I hung up, I sat in my car for another 10 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of an hour, I'd been publicly humiliated by my mother and then offered an opportunity at one of the most prestigious universities in the world. The contrast was so stark it felt like whiplash. I looked toward the courtyard where my family was probably still gathered, my mother likely continuing to hold court about my supposed academic fraud. Part of me wanted to march back over there and announce the Harvard call, to watch her face when she realized how wrong she'd been about my capabilities and my achievements. But a larger part of me knew that wouldn't solve anything. This wasn't really about my grades or my accomplishments. This was about something deeper, something that had been building for years between my mother and me. She'd spent so long believing that success was impossible for people like us, that my success felt like a personal attack on her world. Still, as I drove away from the college, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally shifted. The phone call from Harvard wasn't just about my future. It was validation that my work, my effort, my late nights and early mornings had meant something real. It was proof that I belonged in spaces my mother thought were reserved for other people. What I didn't know yet was that this was just the beginning. The real confrontation, the moment when all of this would come to a head, was still waiting for me at home. The Rodriguez family barbecue was supposed to be a celebration, but by the time I arrived, it felt more like a wake. My relatives were gathered in small groups around my aunt's backyard, speaking in hushed tones and shooting uncomfortable glances toward my mother, who sat alone at the picnic table picking at a plate of food. I pulled into the driveway of Aunt Carmen's house 45 minutes after leaving the college, my hands still trembling from the Harvard phone call. The familiar sounds of a Rodriguez family gathering drifted from the backyard, but there was something subdued about the usual chaos of conversations and laughter. Normally, by this time in the afternoon, my cousin Diego would be manning the grill with a beer in one hand and a spatula in the other, telling jokes loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. Today, the backyard felt heavy with tension. I walked through the side gate, still wearing my cap and gown, and immediately understood why the atmosphere was so different. Word of my mother's outburst had clearly spread. My relatives were clustered in small groups, speaking in hushed Spanish and occasionally glancing toward the corner of the yard where my mother sat alone at the picnic table. She had a paper plate in front of her with untouched carne asada and rice, and she was methodically shredding a napkin into tiny pieces while staring at nothing. My father Marcus spotted me first and walked over quickly, his face creased with concern. "Misha, how are you holding up?" He pulled me into a hug that smelled like aftershave and worry. "I'm so sorry about what happened back there. Your mother, He paused, searching for words that wouldn't be disloyal but would still acknowledge the damage that had been done. "She's scared," I said quietly, surprising myself with the insight. "She's scared that if I succeed it means she could have succeeded too, and that's harder to accept than believing the whole system is rigged." My father looked at me with the kind of expression parents get when they realize their child has grown up when they weren't paying attention. "When did you get so wise?" "Community college," I replied with a weak smile. "They have a philosophy requirement." Aunt Carmen appeared at my elbow with a plate of food and the kind of fierce expression that meant she was ready to go to war on my behalf. "Misha, don't you listen to a word of what she said. That woman raised you, but she doesn't know you. Not like we know you." She gestured around the yard at the collection of uncles, aunts and cousins who made up our extended family. "We've all watched you work. We've seen you at that kitchen table until 3 in the morning with your book. We've seen you turn down parties and dates and fun because you had assignments to finish. Nobody here thinks you cheated." I accepted the plate gratefully, though I wasn't sure I could eat anything. My stomach was still churning from the combination of public humiliation and unexpected opportunity that had defined my afternoon. "Thank you, Tia, that means everything." "What doesn't mean everything," she continued, "is what your mother thinks. Patricia has been angry at the world since she was 15 years old, and she's never figured out how to be happy for other people's success. Don't let her bitterness poison your accomplishment." Uncle Roberto, my father's older brother, joined our conversation with a beer in his hand and concern etched across his weathered features. He worked as a mechanic and had always been one of my biggest supporters, helping me buy my first laptop when I started college, and always asking about my classes when we gathered for family events. "Aaliyah, I need you to know something. What happened today, that wasn't about you. That was about your mother's own disappointments, and she had no right to make them your burden. She's always been like this," I said, finally voicing something I'd never admitted out loud before. "Nothing I do is ever good enough. Every achievement gets explained away as luck or an accident or somehow less than it appears. I thought maybe today would be different. Some people can't celebrate other people's victories because it highlights their own defeats." Uncle Roberto said gently, "Your mother worked hard her whole life and never got the recognition she thought she deserved. When she sees you succeeding in ways she never could, it's like salt in an old wound." Diego appeared with a fresh beer and the kind of grin that meant he had news to share. "Prima, you need to hear this. Mrs. Martinez from down the street was at the graduation, and she's been telling everyone who will listen about how proud she is of you. She said she's never seen a student work as hard as you did, and that your mother is crazy if she thinks you cheated. The whole neighborhood is talking about how you're going to be the first Rodriguez to get a real college degree." "Associate degree," I corrected automatically, the habit of diminishing my own achievements still strong despite everything that had happened. "Associate degree that's taking you places." Diego shot back, "Don't do that thing where you make your success smaller to make other people comfortable. You earned this and you don't have to apologize for it." I was about to respond when I noticed the conversation in the yard had stopped. Everyone was looking toward the house, where my mother had gotten up from the picnic table and was walking in our direction. She moved with the determined stride of someone who had made a decision, and I felt my chest tighten with anxiety about what was coming next. "Aaliyah," she said when she reached our group. Her voice was steady, but I could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her hands were clenched at her sides. "We need to talk." The family members around us exchanged glances, and I could feel their protective instincts kicking. Aunt Carmen stepped slightly closer to me, while my father moved to position himself between my mother and me. The gesture was subtle, but it sent a clear message about where loyalties lay in this conflict. "I think you've said enough for one day," my father said quietly. "I haven't said nearly enough." My mother's gaze never left my face. "Aaliyah, you need to understand something about the real world. College degrees don't guarantee success, especially not for people like us. You're setting yourself up for disappointment, and I won't stand by and watch you crash when reality hits." "What reality is that?" I asked, finding my voice despite the familiar urge to shrink away from her criticism. "The reality that companies don't hire girls from Phoenix barrios, no matter what their grades look like. The reality that scholarship opportunities dry up when you're competing against kids whose parents can afford tutors and test prep and college counselors. The reality that working twice as hard gets you half as far when you don't have the right connections or the right last name." There was something almost desperate in her voice, as if she was trying to save me from a painful truth she'd learned through experience. But there was also anger, deep and long-standing, that seemed to go beyond concern for my future. "So what are you saying?" I asked. "That I should give up? That I should accept limitations that other people put on me? That I should stop trying because trying might lead to disappointment? I'm saying you should be realistic about what's possible, and what's realistic for someone like me." She gestured around the backyard, taking in the modest homes and older cars that defined our neighborhood. "A decent job, a family, a life where you don't reach for things that are designed to be out of your grasp. There's nothing wrong with that life. Aaliyah, it's a good life. There's nothing wrong with that life." I agreed, but there's also nothing wrong with wanting more. Wanting more is what leads to disappointment. Wanting more is what makes you vulnerable to people who will use your ambition against you. Wanting more is what makes you forget where you come from and who your people are. The accusation hung in the air between us, and I realized we'd reached the heart of her opposition to my education. This wasn't really about cheating or grades or the legitimacy of community college. This was about identity and belonging, and the fear that success would take me away from the family and community that had shaped me. "Education doesn't erase where I come from," I said carefully. "It gives me tools to help where I come from. Or does it make you think you're better than where you come from?" The question stung because there was a grain of truth in it. I had changed during my 2 years of college. I'd been exposed to ideas and possibilities that had expanded my worldview beyond the boundaries of our neighborhood. I'd started thinking about problems and solutions on scales I'd never considered before. I'd begun to see my community's challenges not as inevitable facts of life, but as problems that could be addressed through policy and technology and organized effort. But those changes hadn't made me feel superior to my family or my origin. If anything, they'd made me more committed to using whatever opportunities came my way to create opportunities for others. I don't think I'm better than anyone. I think I'm capable of more than I knew, and I want to use that capability to make a difference. Make a difference for who? For your family here, or for the important people you're going to meet at your fancy universities? Before I could answer, my phone. I glanced at the screen and saw a number I didn't recognize, though the Massachusetts area code looked familiar. Given the day I'd been having, I decided to answer it. "Hello? Hi, Aaliyah. This is Sarah from Dr. Hayes' office at Harvard. I hope I'm not interrupting your celebration, but Hayes asked me to follow up on your conversation earlier today. She wanted to make sure you received the email we sent with information about our scholarship program and research opportunities." I was aware of everyone in my family listening intently to my side of the conversation. My mother's expression had shifted from confrontational to confused, and I could see her processing the fact that someone from Harvard was calling me personally. "I haven't had a chance to check my email yet," I admitted. "It's been a busy afternoon." "Of course, graduation day must be overwhelming." "Well, Dr. Hayes wanted me to emphasize how excited the department is about your machine learning project. We've had several faculty members review your work, and the consensus is that it represents graduate-level research quality. That's extremely rare for a transfer applicant, especially one coming from a community college background." I watched my mother's face as Sarah continued talking about research opportunities and full-ride scholarships and faculty positions that might be available to someone with my particular combination of technical skills and innovative thinking. With each word I could see her worldview cracking slightly, her certainty about what was possible for someone like me beginning to waver. "Thank you so much," I said into the phone. I'll review the materials tonight and we can discuss next steps during our call on Monday. Perfect, and I'll leave. Congratulations on your graduation. What you've accomplished is truly remarkable. I hung up and looked around at my family, who were all staring at me with expressions ranging from pride to bewilderment. My mother looked like someone who had been told that gravity was optional. Harvard called me earlier today, I said into the silence. They want to offer me a full scholarship to transfer into their computer science program. They also want to discuss a research assistant position working on cybersecurity applications. The explosion of excited voices was immediate and overwhelming. Diego whooped and lifted me off my feet in a bear hug. Aunt Carmen started crying and praising God in rapid-fire Spanish. Uncle Roberto clapped my father on the back and declared that we needed to break out the good tequila. Cousins and neighbors who had been maintaining polite distance from our family drama suddenly surrounded us with congratulations and questions. Through it all, my mother stood frozen in place, her paper plate forgotten on the ground where she'd dropped it. She looked like someone trying to reconcile two incompatible versions of reality. The world where people like us didn't get opportunities like this, and the world where her daughter was being recruited by Harvard University. My father made his way through the crowd and pulled me aside. Misha, is this real? Harvard really called you? They really called me, twice today actually. They want to discuss opportunities that could lead to a full ride and graduate research positions. I was still struggling to believe it myself. What does this mean? For your future, I mean. I thought about the question seriously before answering. It means I have options I never expected to have. It means the work I've been doing, the late nights and the projects and the studying, it actually led somewhere significant. It means Mom was wrong about what's possible. My father glanced over at my mother, who was now sitting on a lawn chair looking shell-shocked. You know she loves you, right? All of this, the criticism and the skepticism, it comes from a place of wanting to protect you from disappointment. I know, but protection that comes at the cost of possibility isn't really protection. It's just fear dressed up as wisdom. What are you going to do now? I looked around the backyard at the people who had raised me, who had supported me through every challenge and celebrated every small victory along the way. These were my people, and no amount of education or opportunity would change that fundamental truth. But I was also beginning to understand that staying connected to my roots didn't mean accepting limits on my growth. I'm going to take the call on Monday, I said. I'm going to listen to what Harvard has to offer, and I'm going to make decisions based on my goals and values, not on other people's fears about what I can or can't achieve. My father nodded slowly. Your mother isn't going to like that. My mother is going to have to learn to live with a daughter who refuses to make herself smaller to make other people comfortable. As the afternoon wore on, the celebration resumed with renewed energy. The Harvard phone call had transformed the gathering from an awkward family obligation into a genuine party. Neighbors started stopping by when word spread through the community grapevine that a local girl had been offered a full ride to an Ivy League school. Children who usually ignored adult conversations were suddenly interested in asking me about computers and college. Elderly relatives who had been politely supportive of my educational pursuits were now treating me like a celebrity. But through it all, my mother remained on the periphery, present but not participating, watching but not engaging. I could see her struggling with the cognitive dissonance between her long-held beliefs about what was possible for our family and the evidence that those beliefs might be wrong. Every congratulation I received seemed to hit her like a personal rebuke. Every expression of pride from our relatives a reminder of her own public skepticism. I found myself torn between enjoying the celebration and worrying about the growing distance between my mother and the rest of the family. While everyone else was embracing the idea that one of our own had achieved something remarkable, she was becoming increasingly isolated in her insistence that there had to be some explanation other than merit and hard work. Diego caught me watching her during a lull in the conversation. She'll come around, he said quietly. This is a lot for her to process. She spent so many years believing that success was out of reach for people like us that your success feels impossible. What if she doesn't come around? What if this just drives us further apart? Then that's her choice, Prima. You can't make yourself unsuccessful to make your mother comfortable. You can't hide your light to avoid making her feel bad about her own darkness. His words stayed with me as the party continued into the evening. By the time people started heading home, I had received congratulations from 36 relatives and neighbors, promises of support from aunts and uncles who wanted to help however they could, and job offers from family friends who assumed that having a Harvard-bound relative would somehow benefit their businesses. My mother helped clean up the backyard in silence, collecting paper plates and folding chairs with mechanical efficiency. When my father offered to drive her home, she declined and said she'd rather walk. When Aunt Carmen invited her to stay for coffee and cake, she made an excuse about being tired. When I approached her as she was preparing to leave, she avoided eye contact and mumbled something about needing to get home to feed her cat. "Mom," I said as she reached the gate, "can we She paused but didn't turn around. "What's there to talk about? About what happened today. About Harvard. About us." "There is no us, Aaliyah. There's you, with your fancy opportunities and your bright future. And there's me, with my realistic expectations and my working-class limitations. We're living in different worlds now. We don't have to be." She finally turned to face me, and I was shocked to see tears in her eyes. "Yes, we do. Because you've proven that everything I believed about our lives was wrong. If you can get into Harvard, if you can earn scholarships and research positions and all these opportunities, then maybe I could have too. Maybe all these years of settling and accepting and making do were my choice, not my circumstances." The raw pain in her voice hit me like a physical blow. I realized that my success wasn't just challenging her beliefs about what was possible for me, it was forcing her to confront questions about her own unrealized potential and the choices she'd made over the years. "Mom, it's never too late to—" "Yes, it is." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's too late for me. But apparently it's not too late for you, and I don't know how to live with that knowledge." She walked away into the evening darkness, leaving me standing by the gate with a dozen responses I'd never have the chance to give. I watched until her figure disappeared around the corner, knowing that something fundamental had shifted between us and uncertain whether it could ever be repaired. My father appeared beside me with 2 cups of coffee and the kind of sad wisdom that comes from watching people you love hurt each other without meaning to. "Give her time, Mija. This isn't really about you or your achievements. This is about her own relationship with disappointment and regret. What if time isn't enough? What if my success becomes the thing that destroys our relationship? Then your mother will have made a choice to let her own pain matter more than your happiness. And that's not a choice you can prevent or fix." We stood in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood settle into evening quiet. I thought about the day's emotional whiplash, from the pride of graduation to the humiliation of my mother's public criticism, to the shock of Harvard's interest in my work. In 12 hours, my life had changed in ways I was still struggling to understand. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Hi, Aaliyah. This is Dr. Peterson from Desert Valley. I heard about the Harvard opportunity. I'm not surprised, but I'm incredibly proud. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to support you through this transition. You've earned every bit of recognition coming your way." I showed the message to my father, who smiled for the first time since the afternoon's confrontation. People who actually know your work, people who've watched you learn and grow, they're not surprised by Harvard's interest. They know what you're capable of. I just wish Mom could see it that way. Maybe she will in time. But you can't live your life trying to make other people comfortable with your success. You can't dim your own light to keep from blinding people who refuse to adjust their eyes. As we walked back toward the house, I realized that my father was right. The next phase of my life would require me to stop seeking permission to succeed from people who had invested in my failure. It would require me to trust my own judgment about what I was capable of achieving, regardless of what anyone else believed about the limitations that should define my life. The Harvard phone call had been more than an unexpected opportunity. It had been validation that my work, my effort, and my potential were real and valuable. It had been proof that the story my mother told about what was possible for people like us was not the only story available. But as I prepared for bed that night, I also understood that accepting Harvard's offer would mean more than changing schools or even changing my life trajectory. It would mean choosing to live in a world where my mother's fears about disappointment and failure were not the governing principles of my decision-making. It would mean risking the very relationship I'd been trying to protect by limiting my own ambition. The choice ahead of me wasn't really about college or careers or even opportunities. It was about identity and family, and the price of growing beyond the expectations that had shaped me. It was about learning to live with the knowledge that sometimes loving someone means disappointing them, and that sometimes being true to yourself requires you to reject the limitations that other people need to believe in. Monday's phone call with Harvard would be about scholarships and research and academic programs. But the real conversation I needed to have was with myself, about who I wanted to become and what I was willing to risk to get there. The girl who had walked across the graduation stage that morning was already gone. replaced by someone who knew that the world held possibilities her mother couldn't imagine and opportunities that came with costs her family couldn't understand. The transformation had been building for 2 years, through every late-night study session and every project that pushed my technical skills beyond what I thought possible. But it had crystallized in a single afternoon, in the space between public humiliation and private validation, in the gap between my mother's certainty about my limitations and Harvard's recognition of my potential. Whatever happened next would require me to navigate the distance between where I came from and where I was going, to find a way to honor my roots while refusing to be constrained by them. It would require me to love my family without letting their fears become my ceiling, to respect my mother without accepting her version of what my life should look like. The phone call from Harvard had been the beginning of something, but I was beginning to understand that it was also the end of something else. The end of seeking external validation for my worth. The end of making my achievements smaller to make other people comfortable. The end of accepting limits that other people needed to believe in but that I had the power to transcend. As I finally drifted off to sleep, still wearing the cap and gown that had started the day as symbols of achievement and ended it as reminders of transformation, I knew that Monday's conversation would change everything. But I also knew that the real change had already happened. In a hospital parking lot where I'd realized that my mother's voice in my head didn't have to be the final authority on what I could accomplish. The girl who had started the day seeking approval was gone. The woman who would take Harvard's call was someone entirely new, someone who understood that respect is earned not through diminishing yourself, but through refusing to accept limitations that others mistake for wisdom. Someone who knew that the most expensive lesson isn't always the one that costs money, but the one that costs the comfortable illusion that some doors are meant to stay closed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new choices. But tonight, for the first time in my life, I fell asleep knowing that I was enough exactly as I was, and that the world was bigger than anyone had ever told me it could be. Monday morning arrived with the kind of desert heat that makes Phoenix feel like an oven preheating for the day ahead. I sat at my small kitchen table with my laptop open, 3 cups of coffee already consumed, and my notes from the weekend spread across every available surface. The Harvard information packet that Hayes' assistant had emailed was more comprehensive than anything I'd ever received from any institution, detailing not just scholarship opportunities but research fellowships, mentorship programs, and pathways to graduate school that I hadn't even known existed. The machine learning algorithm I'd developed as my capstone project was apparently more significant than I'd realized. According to the materials Harvard had sent, my approach to predictive cybersecurity modeling had caught the attention of their artificial intelligence research division, and they were interested in expanding it into a full research program with potential applications for national security and corporate data protection. I'd spent Sunday evening reading through academic papers and research proposals, trying to understand exactly what they were offering and whether I was qualified for the level of work they expected. The imposter syndrome was hitting hard. That familiar voice in my head whispering that there had been some mistake, that someone like me didn't belong in conversations about cutting-edge research at elite institutions. But every time that voice started to take hold, I remembered the look on my mother's face when Harvard called during the barbecue. The shock and confusion had been genuine, and it had forced me to confront the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I actually was as capable as my achievements suggested. My phone rang at exactly 9 o'clock. The punctuality somehow both comforting and intimidating. Elizabeth Hayes' voice was warm but professional, with the kind of confident authority that comes from years of academic leadership. Aaliyah, thank you for making time for this conversation. I hope you had a chance to review the materials we sent over the weekend. I did, and I have to say, I'm both excited and overwhelmed. The research opportunities are incredible, but I want to make sure I understand what would be expected of me. I'm coming from a community college background, and I don't want to overestimate my preparedness for this level of academic work. Dr. Hayes laughed, and there was something reassuring about the sound. I appreciate your honesty, but I think you're underestimating yourself. We've had our computer science faculty review your capstone project extensively, and the consensus is that it demonstrates both technical sophistication and innovative thinking that we rarely see from students at any level, including our current graduate student. She went on to explain that my algorithm's approach to real-time threat detection was solving problems that major technology companies were investing millions of dollars to address. The methodology I'd developed could potentially be applied to everything from financial systems to healthcare networks to government infrastructure. making it the kind of research that attracted both academic interest and significant funding opportunity. The scholarship we're prepared to offer covers full tuition, room and board, plus a stipend for living expenses and research materials. In exchange, you'd be expected to maintain strong academic performance and contribute to our cybersecurity research lab under the supervision of Dr. Michael Chen, who leads our artificial intelligence security initiative. The numbers she mentioned were staggering, not just the financial support, which would eliminate every economic barrier that had made college feel impossible just a few years earlier, but the research budget and the resources that would be available for expanding my work. It was the kind of opportunity that could transform not just my own life but potentially contribute to solving real-world problems that affected millions of people. There's something else I want to discuss, Dr. Hayes continued. We're also interested in your background and perspective, your community college experience, your work history, your understanding of what it means to overcome economic barriers to education. These aren't limitations we need to overlook. They're assets that bring valuable perspective to our research community. The comment caught me off guard. I'd spent so much time worrying about whether my unconventional path to higher education would be seen as a disadvantage that it hadn't occurred to me it might actually be valuable. The assumption had always been that I'd need to prove I belonged despite my background, not because of. Can you tell me more about what that means practically? Well, one of the challenges with cybersecurity research is that it often focuses on protecting systems and institutions without considering the human factors that make those systems vulnerable. Your experience with economic insecurity, with navigating systems that weren't designed for people like you, with finding creative solutions to resource constraints, that gives you insights that many of our students and faculty simply don't have. She explained that they were particularly interested in research that addressed cybersecurity challenges faced by smaller organizations, community institutions, and individuals who couldn't afford enterprise-level protection. My algorithm's efficiency and cost-effectiveness made it potentially applicable to exactly those contexts, and my personal understanding of resource limitations could guide the research in directions that pure technical expertise might miss. I have to ask, I said, how did you even know about my project? I submitted it to several schools, but I never expected it to generate this kind of attention. Your community college professor, Dr. Peterson, actually reached out to us direct. She has a PhD from MIT and maintains connections in the academic community. When she saw your work, she felt it deserved a larger audience than it was likely to receive through normal transfer application processes. The revelation that Dr. Peterson had actively advocated for me hit harder than all the technical praise combined. I'd known she was supportive, but I hadn't realized she'd taken it upon herself to ensure my work received the recognition it deserved. It was another reminder that success rarely happens in isolation, that there are often people working behind the scenes to create opportunities for students who might otherwise be overlooked. Aaliyah, I want to be direct with you about something. We have our pick of transfer students from prestigious universities around the country, students with perfect SAT scores, extensive extracurricular activities, and all the traditional markers of academic success. But what you've produced, the quality of thinking, and the innovative approach to complex problems, that's not something that can be taught or coached. That's intellectual curiosity and analytical capability that you've developed independently, and it's exactly what we're looking for in our research students. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, covering practical details about housing, course requirements, and the timeline for making a decision. Hayes was clear that they needed an answer within 2 weeks, but she emphasized that they were prepared to work with me on any concerns or logistical challenges that might affect my ability to accept their offer. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my laptop screen, trying to process what had just happened. 3 days ago, I'd been a community college graduate, with decent prospects for transferring to a state university. Today I had a full scholarship offer from Harvard and an invitation to join research that could potentially influence cybersecurity protocols across multiple industries. The practical implications were overwhelming enough, but the psychological impact was even more significant. Every assumption I'd made about my own limitations, every internalized message about what was possible for someone with my background, every moment of self-doubt about whether I belonged in academic spaces, all of it had been challenged by a single phone conversation. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Peterson. How did the Harvard call go? I've been thinking about you all morning. I called her immediately, needing to share the news with someone who would understand both the academic significance and the personal magnitude of what was being offered. Aaliyah, I was hoping you'd call. Tell me everything. I walked her through the conversation, from the research opportunities to the financial support to Dr. Hayes's comments about the value of my perspective and background. Peterson listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of approval or excitement. I'm not surprised by any of this, she said when I finished. What you produced in my advanced programming class was graduate-level work, and the independent research you did for your capstone project demonstrated the kind of intellectual curiosity and methodological rigor that top universities are looking for. But is it real? I keep thinking there's been some mistake, that they're going to realize I don't actually belong there. Aaliyah listened to me carefully. I've been teaching for 15 years, and I've worked with students who went on to successful careers at major technology companies, government agencies, and academic institutions. Your work doesn't just belong at Harvard. It belongs at the forefront of cybersecurity research, and Harvard recognizes that. She paused and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. I want to tell you something that I probably should have mentioned before. When I saw your algorithm, I didn't just think it was good student work. I thought it was publishable research that could make a real contribution to the field. That's why I reached out to my contacts. That's why I made sure the right people saw what you'd accomplished. The knowledge that a professor, whose judgment I trusted completely, had considered my work publication worthy, was almost too much to absorb. I'd been so focused on just completing my degree requirements that I hadn't considered the possibility that my projects might have value beyond the classroom. What happens now? I asked. Now you make a decision about what kind of future you want to build. And Aaliyah, I want you to know that whatever you decide, you have support. Your family may not understand the academic world, but you have mentors who do, and we believe in your potential. After I hung up with Dr. Peterson, I decided I needed to share the news with my family. The conversation with Harvard had made the opportunity real in a way that Saturday's phone call hadn't, and I knew I needed to start preparing the people I cared about for the possibility that my life was about to change dramatically. I called my father first, knowing he would be supportive even if he didn't fully understand the implications of what was being offered. Misha, how did the call go? Dad, they offered me everything. Full scholarship, research position, mentorship opportunities, everything. They want me to help develop cybersecurity systems that could protect hospitals and schools and small businesses from cyber attacks. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. When my father finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I'm proud of you, Aaliyah, so proud that I don't have words for it. Your grandmother, God rest her soul, she always said that education was the one thing no one could take away from you. She would have been over the moon to know that her granddaughter was going to Harvard. Are you okay with me being so far from home? Baby, I'm okay with you being exactly where you belong, and if Harvard thinks you belong there, then that's where you should. I could hear him getting choked up, and I realized that this conversation was probably bringing up complicated feelings about his own educational opportunities and the choices he'd made as a young man. My father was intelligent and capable, but he'd started working construction right out of high school to support his family, and he'd never had the chance to explore what he might have accomplished with more formal education. This doesn't change who I am, Dad. I'll still be the same person, still part of this family. I know that, Misha, but you'll also be something more than you were before, and that's exactly what every parent hopes for their children. I hung up feeling supported and loved, but also acutely aware that not everyone in my family would respond with the same enthusiasm. My mother's reaction on Saturday had made it clear that she saw my academic success as somehow threatening rather than celebratory, and I knew that accepting Harvard's offer would only intensify her discomfort.
Diego called me that afternoon, having heard about the Harvard call from my father. His excitement was infectious and uncomplicated. The kind of pure joy that comes from seeing someone you love succeed beyond their wildest expectations. Prima, this is incredible. Harvard. Do you know what this means for our whole family? You're going to be the first Rodriguez to graduate from an Ivy League school, the first one to work on research that could change the world, the first one to prove that we're just as smart and capable as anyone else. His enthusiasm helped counteract some of the anxiety I'd been feeling about whether I actually deserved this opportunity. Diego had always believed in my potential, even when I didn't believe in it myself, and his confidence in my abilities felt like solid ground beneath my feet. Are you going to accept? I think so. I mean, how do you turn down an opportunity like this? But I'm scared, Diego. What if I get there and realize I don't belong? What if I can't handle the workload or the pressure? What if I fail? What if you succeed beyond your wildest dreams? What if you develop technology that saves lives? What if you become exactly who you're meant to be? His voice got serious. Aaliyah, you've been preparing for this your whole life. Even when you didn't know it. Every night you spent studying instead of partying. Every time you chose the harder class instead of the easier one. Every project you completed perfectly, even when no one was watching. All of that was preparing you for this moment. What about Mom? She's barely speaking to me since Saturday, and if I accept this offer, it's going to get worse before it gets better. That's Mom's problem to solve, not yours. You can't make your life smaller to make other people comfortable with their own choices. You can't refuse opportunities because other people are intimidated by your success. That evening, I found myself at Aunt Carmen's house, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the Harvard materials spread out between us. She'd been reading through everything with the careful attention she usually reserved for insurance documents and tax forms, asking questions about costs and requirements and timelines. Mija, this is bigger than anything our family has ever been offered. You understand that, right? I understand that it's a good opportunity. I'm just not sure I understand how good, or whether I'm really qualified for it. She looked at me with the kind of exasperated affection that comes from loving someone who can't see their own worth. Aaliyah Rodriguez, let me tell you something. I've watched you since you were little, and you've always been different. Not better than anyone else, but different. You see problems and immediately start thinking about solutions. You ask questions that other people don't think to ask. You work harder than anyone I know, and you never give up when things get difficult. She gestured to the Harvard documents. These people didn't make a mistake. They know exactly what they're doing, and they want you because of who you are and what you can do. The question isn't whether you deserve this opportunity. The question is what you're going to do with it. What do you think I should do? I think you should stop asking other people what you should do, and start trusting your own judgment. You're the one who did the work that impressed Harvard. You're the one who built something that could help protect people from cyber attacks. You're the one who earned this opportunity through years of effort and sacrifice. She reached across the table and took my hands. But I also think you should remember where you come from, and why this matters. This isn't just about you anymore, Aaliyah. This is about showing other kids in our neighborhood that these opportunities are possible. This is about opening doors that have been closed to people like us. This is about using your success to create more success for others. Her words helped me understand something I'd been struggling with since Saturday's confrontation with my mother. This opportunity wasn't just about my individual achievement or personal advancement. It was about expanding the definition of who gets to participate in spaces of power and influence, who gets to contribute to solving important problems, who gets to benefit from the highest levels of education and opportunity. That night, I called my mother. I'd been putting off the conversation, knowing it would be difficult, but I realized I couldn't make this decision without at least trying to repair the relationship that had been damaged by Saturday's public confrontation. Hi, Mom. Aaliyah. Her voice was neutral, neither warm nor hostile. I wanted to talk to you about Harvard, about what they're offering, and what it might mean. Silence. Mom, are you there? I'm here, I'm just waiting for you to tell me how this proves I was wrong about everything. The bitterness in her voice was like a physical ache in my chest. This isn't about proving anyone wrong. This is about an opportunity that could change my life and maybe help other people too. An opportunity that takes you away from your family and your community to live in a world that will never really accept you, no matter how smart you are or how hard you work. Why can't you believe that I might actually belong there? Why is it easier for you to assume that Harvard made a mistake than to accept that your daughter might be capable of more than you imagined? The question hung in the air between us, and for a moment I thought she might actually answer it honestly. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller, more vulnerable than I'd heard it since I was a child. Because if you can make it at Harvard, if you can succeed in spaces that I always believed were closed to people like us, then I have to ask myself why I never tried. I have to confront the possibility that the limitations I accepted were choices I made, not walls that were built around me. The raw honesty of her response caught me off guard. For the first time I understood that her resistance to my success wasn't really about me at all. It was about her own unrealized potential, her own abandoned dreams, her own relationship with the possibilities she'd never pursued. Mom, it's not too late for you to pursue your own goals. You're only 52. You're smart and capable, and there's nothing stopping you from going back to school or starting a business or doing whatever it is you've always wanted to do. Yes, there is something stopping me. Fear. The same fear you're choosing to ignore. And I don't know whether that makes you brave or foolish. Maybe it makes me both. Maybe that's what it takes to change your life in any significant way. We talked for another hour, and while we didn't resolve the fundamental tension between her fear-based worldview and my opportunity-focused approach to life, we at least reached a place of mutual understanding. She was afraid for me, afraid that I would be disappointed or rejected or hurt by reaching for something beyond what our family had ever achieved. I was afraid that letting her fears govern my decisions would mean missing opportunities that might never come again. By the time I hung up, I knew what my answer to Harvard would be. Not because the conversation with my mother had resolved anything, but because it had clarified the choice I was actually making. I could choose to live within the boundaries of what had always seemed possible for people like us, or I could choose to test those boundaries and see what lay beyond them. The next morning, I called Dr. Hayes' office and scheduled a follow-up conversation for later in the week. I spent the time in between reading more about Harvard's computer science program, researching the faculty I'd be working with, and imagining what my life might look like as a research student at one of the most prestigious universities in the world. But I also spent time thinking about responsibility and representation, about what it would mean to be possibly the only student in my classes who had grown up in poverty, who had worked minimum wage jobs to pay for school, who understood intimately what it meant to navigate systems that weren't designed with people like me in mind. The opportunity Harvard was offering wasn't just about my own education and career prospects. It was about bringing perspective and experience to research that could have real-world impact, about ensuring that technological solutions considered the needs of communities that had historically been excluded from both the problem-solving process and the benefits of innovation. When I called Dr. Hayes on Thursday to accept their offer, I felt more confident than I had at any point in the process. Not because I was certain I could handle the academic rigor or social challenges of an Ivy League environment, but because I was certain that my perspective and experience would add value to the work they were doing. Aaliyah, we're thrilled that you've decided to join our research community. I think you're going to find that Harvard has as much to learn from you as you have to learn from us. As I hung up the phone and began the process of preparing to leave everything I'd ever known for an opportunity I'd never dared to imagine, I realized that the girl who had been publicly humiliated by her mother just 5 days earlier was already gone. In her place was someone who understood that respect isn't something you inherit or something you're given. It's something you earn through the courage to pursue your potential even when the people you love most can't envision the same possibilities you see. The news of my acceptance to Harvard spread through our neighborhood like wildfire. By Friday evening, 3 days after I'd officially confirmed my enrollment, it seemed like half of Phoenix knew that Patricia Rodriguez's daughter was heading to Cambridge with a full scholarship. The reactions ranged from genuine excitement and pride to barely concealed skepticism and resentment, creating an atmosphere of tension that seemed to follow me wherever I went. Missy Ketters from the corner house stopped me during my evening walk to tell me how proud she was and to ask if I could help her grandson with his computer science homework when I came home for visits. Santos from the auto repair shop offered me a part-time job whenever I needed extra money, saying he'd always known I was destined for bigger things. The librarian at our local branch, who had watched me study there for years, actually teared up when she congratulated me, telling me I was proof that the American dream was still alive for people willing to work for it. But there were other reactions too. Whispered conversations that stopped when I walked by. Sideways glances from people who seemed to be questioning whether I really deserved this opportunity or whether there was something suspicious about a girl from our neighborhood getting into Harvard. Comments about how I'd probably change once I got around all those rich kids, how I'd forget where I came from, how education sometimes made people think they were too good for their family. The most difficult part was that some of these comments came from people I'd grown up respecting, adults who had been part of my extended community for years. It forced me to confront the reality that not everyone would celebrate my success, and that some people's investment in maintaining limitations was stronger than their desire to see those limitations overcome. But nothing prepared me for the conversation I had with my mother the following Sunday. I'd been avoiding her since our phone call earlier in the week, giving both of us space to process the reality of my decision. But Aunt Carmen had mentioned that my mother seemed to be struggling with the news, barely eating and spending most of her time alone in her apartment. Despite everything that had happened between us, I couldn't ignore the possibility that she was genuinely suffering over our relationship. I knocked on her apartment door around 2 in the afternoon, carrying coffee from the shop we used to go to together when I was younger. She answered wearing an old robe and slippers, looking like she hadn't slept well in days. "Hi Mom, can we talk?" She stepped aside to let me in, but her body language was guarded, arms crossed defensively across her chest. Her small living room was cluttered with newspapers and magazines, and I noticed several college brochures scattered across the coffee table. When I looked closer, I realized they were from local community colleges and universities, programs for adult learners and continuing education. Are you thinking about going back to school? I asked, genuinely curious. She followed my gaze and quickly gathered up the brochures, as if I'd caught her doing something embarrassing. I was just looking, trying to understand what all this college talk is really about. Mom, that's wonderful. You should absolutely consider it if it's something you want to do. Should I? Should I really? Her voice had an edge to it that I recognized as the prelude to a larger conversation. Or should I accept that some opportunities are meant for younger people, people who haven't already made their choices and have to live with the consequence? I sat down on her couch, trying to create an atmosphere where we could have an honest conversation without the defensive barriers that had characterized most of our recent interactions. What consequences are you talking about? She sat across from me in her worn recliner, the same chair where she'd helped me with homework when I was little, where we'd watched novellas together on weekend afternoons, where she'd held me when I cried about boys or friends or the general unfairness of teenage life. The consequences of having a baby at 19, of dropping out of high school to work, of choosing survival over dreams for so many years that I forgot I ever had dreams, of raising a daughter while telling myself that limitations were wisdom instead of fear. The raw honesty of her response left me speechless for a moment. This was the conversation I'd been hoping we could have, the one where we acknowledged the real issues beneath our conflict over my education and future. You did what you had to do to take care of us. There's nothing shameful about that, isn't there? She leaned forward and I could see years of accumulated regret and self-doubt in her expression. Because watching you succeed, seeing you get opportunities that I convinced myself were impossible for people like us, it's making me question every choice I made, every time I settled for less than I wanted, every time I accepted limitations without fighting them. It's not too late to fight them now. Yes, it is. Her voice was firm, but I could hear the pain underneath. Not because of age or circumstances, but because I've spent so many years believing in my own limitations that I don't know how to believe in my possibilities anymore. And watching you believe in yours so completely, it's like looking in a mirror and seeing all the ways I failed myself. The conversation was heading toward territory that felt dangerous, places where hurt feelings and unresolved disappointments could cause damage that might never heal. But it also felt necessary, like a wound that needed to be cleaned before it could properly heal. Your failures aren't my responsibility to fix or avoid repeating, and my success isn't a judgment on the choices you made under different circumstances. Isn't it though? When you were little, I used to tell you that education was the most important thing, that it was the way out of poverty and limitation. But somewhere along the way, I stopped believing that was true for us. I started protecting you from disappointment instead of preparing you for possibility. She got up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where we'd both grown up, where most people worked hard but never got ahead, where dreams were considered luxuries that practical people couldn't afford. When you started doing well in school, instead of encouraging you to reach higher, I started warning you about reaching too high. When you talked about college, instead of helping you figure out how to make it happen, I tried to convince you to be realistic about what was possible. I turned my own fears into your limitations. Why are you telling me this now? She turned back to face me, and I could see tears in her eyes. Because Harvard called you, Aaliyah. One of the most prestigious universities in the world looked at your work and decided you belonged there. Because Dr. Peterson reached out to her contacts to make sure your talent was recognized. Because everything I told you about our place in the world, about what people like us could achieve, was wrong. It wasn't wrong for you. It was the truth of your experience, based on the opportunities that were available to you at the time. But it doesn't have to be my truth. That's just it. I'm starting to realize it didn't have to be my truth either. I made it my truth by accepting it without question, by teaching it to you as if it were fact instead of just one possible story about our lives. She sat back down, and for the first time in years, I saw her not as my critical mother, but as a woman who had been carrying regret and disappointment for decades, who had confused protection with limitation, who had genuinely believed she was saving me from pain by encouraging me to expect less from life. What happens now? With us? I mean with our relationship. I don't know. I want to be proud of you, Aaliyah. I want to celebrate your success and support your dream. But I also have to figure out how to live with the knowledge that I spent years discouraging you from pursuing the very opportunities that you were capable of achieving. Maybe you figure it out by pursuing some opportunities of your own. Maybe you show me and yourself that it's never too late to believe in possibilities. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. At 52, with a GED and 20 years of working retail jobs, What opportunities could possibly be available to someone like me? I pointed to the college brochures she'd tried to hide.
Apparently, you've been researching some possibilities already. I was just curious. I wanted to understand what kind of environment you'd be entering, what kind of academic work you'd be doing, and what did you find out? She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her wrestling with something internal. I found out that there are programs for adult learners, scholarships for people who want to go back to school, support systems for students who don't fit the traditional mold. I found out that some of the limitations I accepted might have been more negotiable than I realized. What kind of program interests you? Business administration, maybe, or social work. Something that would let me help other people navigate systems and opportunities, maybe prevent other parents from making the mistakes I made with you. The idea of my mother going back to school, of her discovering her own potential and pursuing her own dreams, was both thrilling and terrifying. Thrilling because it might mean she could understand and support my choices from a place of personal experience. Terrifying because it might mean our relationship would change in ways I couldn't predict or control. I think you should do it. I think you should apply and see what happens, even if it means admitting that I was wrong about almost everything I taught you about limitations and possibilities. Especially because of that, Mom, you're not the first parent to make decisions based on fear instead of hope. You're not the first person to project your own disappointments onto someone you love, but you could be one of the first to change course and show that it's never too late to pursue the life you actually want. We talked for another 2 hours, and while we didn't solve everything that had been broken between us, we at least began the process of understanding each other's perspective. She helped me understand that her criticism and skepticism had come from a place of love, from a desperate desire to protect me from the kind of disappointment she'd experienced. I helped her understand that my success wasn't a rejection of her or our family, but an expansion of what our family could become. When I left her apartment that afternoon, she hugged me for the first time since graduation day. It wasn't the kind of reconciliation you see in movies, where everything is forgiven and forgotten in a single conversation. But it was a beginning, a recognition that we both wanted a relationship that could accommodate my success and her growth. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation for my move to Cambridge. There were forms to complete, housing arrangements to finalize, travel plans to make. But there were also deeper preparations that couldn't be documented on any checklist. I had to prepare emotionally for leaving the only community I'd ever known, for entering an environment where I might be the only person who understood what it meant to choose between buying textbooks and eating regularly, where my classmates' casual references to family vacations and private tutors would remind me daily of the different worlds we'd grown up in. I had to prepare academically for coursework that would be more challenging than anything I'd encounter, for professors who would expect me to contribute to discussions about concepts I'd only read about, for research that would require me to generate original ideas rather than just demonstrate understanding of existing knowledge. But most importantly, I had to prepare psychologically for the possibility that I might fail, that despite Harvard's confidence in my abilities, I might discover that there were gaps in my preparation that couldn't be overcome through effort alone. I had to learn to distinguish between the healthy fear that motivates careful preparation and the paralyzing fear that prevents action entirely. Dr. Peterson helped me with some of these preparations during our weekly coffee meetings in the month before I left Phoenix. She connected me with other students who had made similar transitions, helped me understand what to expect from the academic culture at elite institutions, and reassured me that the qualities that had made me successful at the community college level would serve me well in any environment. The biggest challenge you'll face, she told me during one of our conversations, won't be the academic work. You've already proven you can handle sophisticated technical problems. The biggest challenge will be learning to trust your own voice in environments where everyone seems more confident and experienced than you are. What if they are more confident and experienced? Then you'll learn from them, but remember that your experience is also valuable. You've solved problems under resource constraints that most of your classmates have never faced. You've developed independence and resilience that can't be taught in any classroom. Don't let anyone convince you that different preparation means inferior preparation. Diego helped me with the practical aspects of moving across the country, researching everything from winter clothing requirements to campus resources for first-generation college students. But he also helped me maintain perspective about what this opportunity meant and what it didn't mean. You're still going to be the same person when you get there, he reminded me during one of our conversations. Harvard doesn't change your DNA or your values or your commitment to family. It just gives you tools and opportunities to become more of who you already are. What if I do change, though? What if living in that environment for 4 years turns me into someone our family doesn't recognize? Then we'll learn to recognize the new person you become,
as long as you remember to stay connected to the people who knew and loved the person you were before. My father helped me with the emotional preparation, sharing stories about other family members who had taken risks and made changes that seemed scary at the time but led to better lives for themselves and their children. He reminded me that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear when the potential benefits outweighed the risk. Your great-grandmother came to this country speaking no English, with no money and no guarantee that she'd be able to create a better life for her children, he told me as we packed boxes in my apartment. She was terrified every day for the first 5 years, but she was more afraid of staying stuck than she was of facing the unknown. That's the same courage you're showing now. But the most meaningful preparation came from my mother, who began joining our family conversations about my upcoming transition with increasing frequency and decreasing defensiveness. She started asking questions about my research, about the professors I'd be working with, about my plans for contributing to cybersecurity solutions that could help protect organizations like hospitals and schools. More importantly, she started sharing her own news. 2 weeks before I was scheduled to leave for Cambridge, she announced that she'd been accepted into a business administration program at the local community college, with plans to eventually transfer to Arizona State University for her bachelor's degree. I figured if my daughter can handle Harvard, I can probably handle community college, she said with a smile that was equal parts nervous and excited. Besides, someone in this family should understand what you're going through academically, and it might as well be me. The announcement was met with enthusiastic support from the entire family, but I understood that it was particularly meaningful for our relationship. She wasn't just pursuing her own education, she was demonstrating that my success had inspired rather than intimidated her, that my achievements had expanded her sense of what was possible rather than diminishing her sense of her own worth. The night before I left Phoenix, my family threw a going-away party that felt more like a celebration of new beginnings than a farewell to what was ending. My mother gave a speech that surprised everyone, including her. I want to apologize to my daughter, she said, standing in Aunt Carmen's backyard surrounded by 3 generations of Rodriguez family members and friends. I spent too many years trying to protect her from disappointment by encouraging her to expect less from life. I was wrong about what was possible, and I was wrong about what she deserved to pursue. She paused and I could see her gathering courage for what came next. But I also want to thank her, because watching her refuse to accept the limitations I tried to impose, watching her pursue opportunities I thought were meant for other people, it forced me to examine my own limitations and ask whether they were real or just accepted without question. She looked directly at me. Aaliyah, you're not just going to Harvard for yourself. You're going for everyone in this community who has ever been told that certain dreams aren't meant for people like us. You're proving that intelligence and determination and hard work can open doors that we thought were locked forever. As I boarded the plane to Boston the next morning, carrying everything I owned in 2 suitcases and a backpack, I realized that the journey I was beginning wasn't just about my education or career prospects. It was about testing the boundaries of what was possible for my family, my community, and myself. It was about discovering whether the limitations we'd accepted were actually limitations or just stories we'd been telling ourselves about what we could achieve. The girl who had been publicly humiliated by her mother's accusations of cheating was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the most expensive lessons aren't always about money. Sometimes they're about the cost of underestimating people, the price of projecting your own fears onto someone else's possibilities, and the value of discovering that respect isn't inherited but earned through the courage to pursue your potential regardless of what anyone else believes about your limitations. As the plane lifted off from Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, I looked down at the desert landscape that had shaped me, at the neighborhoods and schools and family homes that would always be part of who I was. But I was also looking forward to Cambridge, to Harvard, to research opportunities that could contribute to solving real-world problems, to becoming someone who could open doors for others the way Dr. Peterson and Dr. Hayes had opened doors for me. The confrontation with my mother had ultimately been about more than grades or achievements or academic opportunities. It had been about the right to define my own possibilities, to pursue dreams that extended beyond what anyone in my family had previously imagined, to transform limitations into launching pads rather than ceilings. And as the plane climbed higher into the desert sky, I understood that I'd won more than admission to Harvard. I'd won the right to discover who I could become when I stopped accepting other people's definitions of what was possible for someone like me. The most valuable lesson hadn't been about cybersecurity algorithms or research methodology. It had been about the courage to believe in possibilities that no one in my family had ever been able to envision, and the strength to pursue those possibilities even when the people I loved most couldn't understand why I was willing to risk everything to reach them. 2 years later, I stood in Harvard's computer science building, adjusting my graduation cap one more time as I prepared to walk across the stage for my bachelor's degree ceremony. The Massachusetts spring was nothing like the desert heat I'd grown up with, but the nervous energy in my stomach felt exactly the same as it had at Desert Valley Community College. The difference was everything else. This time my research had been featured in 3 peer-reviewed journals. This time I was graduating summa cum laude from one of the most prestigious universities in the world. This time I had job offers from Google, Microsoft and Apple, along with acceptance letters to PhD programs at Stanford, MIT and Carnegie Mellon. This time my algorithm had been licensed by the Department of Homeland Security for protecting critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. But most importantly, this time my mother was sitting in the front row with tears of pride streaming down her face, wearing her own cap and gown from Arizona State University, where she'd just completed her bachelor's degree in business administration, with a concentration in social entrepreneurship. The journey to this moment hadn't been smooth or predictable. My first semester at Harvard had been overwhelming in ways I hadn't anticipated, not because of the academic work, which was challenging but manageable, but because of the cultural adjustment to an environment where casual conversations about family ski trips and summer homes in the Hamptons reminded me daily that I came from a different world than most of my classmates. There had been moments of profound loneliness, when I questioned whether I truly belonged in spaces where everyone else seemed to navigate social and academic expectations with an ease that came from lifelong familiarity with elite institutions. There had been study groups where I felt like I was translating not just technical concepts but cultural references that everyone else took for granted. But there had also been moments of profound validation. Professor Chen, my research advisor, had nominated my cybersecurity algorithm for the National Undergraduate Research Competition, where it had won first place and attracted attention from both academic institutions and technology companies. The algorithm I'd developed to predict and prevent cyber attacks in real time had been implemented by several major hospitals and school districts, protecting patient records and student information from the kind of security breaches that had become increasingly common. More meaningfully, I'd found my community among other first-generation college students, international students and people whose paths to Harvard had been unconventional. We'd formed study groups that became support systems, academic partnerships that became lifelong friendships, and research collaborations that had produced work none of us could have accomplished individually. Diego had visited twice, both times returning to Phoenix with stories about how I'd stayed exactly the same person despite living in what he called the fancy university bubble. My father had come for Parents' Weekend my sophomore year, spending 3 days asking thoughtful questions about my research and taking pictures of everything from my dorm room to the library where I spent most of my time. But the most significant visitor had been my mother, who had come to Cambridge 6 months earlier to attend a conference on social entrepreneurship and community development that Harvard's business school was hosting. She'd spent a week sitting in on my classes, meeting my professors, and learning about the research that was consuming most of my time and energy. "I understand now," she'd said as we walked around campus on her last day. "This isn't about leaving our community or becoming someone different. This is about gaining tools and knowledge that can help solve the problems our community faces." She'd been right. My research on cybersecurity hadn't just been an academic exercise. It had been directly applicable to protecting the kinds of small businesses, community organizations, and local institutions that served neighborhoods like the one we'd grown up in. The algorithm I'd developed was specifically designed to be cost-effective and user-friendly for organizations that couldn't afford enterprise-level security solutions. During her visit, my mother had also shared news about her own academic journey. After completing her associate degree at the community college, she'd transferred to Arizona State University and was thriving in their business program. More importantly, she'd started a small consulting company that helped other adult learners navigate the process of returning to school and accessing educational resources. "I realized that my experience with limitations and barriers wasn't a source of shame," she'd explained. "It was expertise that could help other people overcome similar challenges. Every mistake I made, every opportunity I missed, every fear that held me back, all of that became valuable knowledge when I learned how to share it constructively." Now, as I waited in the wings of Harvard's graduation ceremony, I could see her in the audience next to my father, Aunt Carmen, and Diego, all of whom had made the trip to Cambridge to celebrate this milestone. She was wearing her own cap and gown because Arizona State had scheduled their graduation ceremony for the same weekend, and she'd chosen to attend mine instead of her own. When they called my name, the applause from my family section was enthusiastic enough to make several people turn around and smile. I walked across the stage, shook hands with the dean, and accepted my diploma with the same mixture of pride and disbelief I'd felt 2 years earlier. But this time, the disbelief wasn't about whether I deserved the recognition. It was about how much my life had changed and how many opportunities lay ahead. After the ceremony, my family gathered for photos and celebration at a restaurant near camp. The conversation was animated and joyful, full of questions about my plans for graduate school and excitement about the job offers I was considering. But the most meaningful moment came when my mother pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Aaliyah, I need to tell you something. When Harvard called you 2 years ago, when you told us about the scholarship and the research opportunities, I was terrified, not because I didn't think you could handle it, but because I thought it would take you away from us permanently. And now I understand that education doesn't separate you from your community. It gives you more ways to contribute to it. Everything you've learned here, every connection you've made, every skill you've developed, it's all making you more valuable to the people and places you care about." She paused, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. "But I also need to apologize for something else. When I accused you of cheating at your community college graduation, I wasn't really talking about your academic work. I was talking about my own life, my own sense that success required shortcuts or luck or connections that people like us didn't have access to." "Mom, you don't need to." "Yes, I do, because I was wrong about that too. Success requires work and persistence, and the courage to pursue opportunities even when they seem out of reach. You didn't cheat your way to Harvard, Aaliyah. You earned your way here through years of effort and determination, and I should have recognized that from the beginning." The conversation was interrupted by Diego, who announced that he had news to share. He'd been accepted into a master's program in education at Arizona State, with plans to become a high school counselor, specializing in helping first-generation college students navigate the application and transition process. "Apparently watching my prima succeed at Harvard made me realize I wanted to help other kids from our neighborhood figure out how to pursue their own opportunities," he said with a grin. "Who knew that success could be contagious?" My father raised his glass of iced tea to the Rodriguez women, who proved that it's never too late to discover what you're capable of achieving. The toast was followed by individual congratulations from extended family members who had driven from Phoenix for the ceremony. Uncle Roberto presented me with a small gift, a keychain with a tiny computer that he'd had engraved with Dr. Rodriguez, even though I hadn't officially decided to pursue a PhD yet. "It's not about the title," it's about the recognition that you've become someone who solves problems for other people, someone who uses knowledge to make life better for your community." As the celebration continued into the evening, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The girl who had been publicly humiliated by accusations of cheating was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the most valuable achievements aren't the ones that impress other people, but the ones that enable you to make a meaningful contribution to solving problems that matter. The transformation hadn't been just mine. My mother had gone from someone who saw limitations as protection to someone who saw possibilities as responsibility. She'd built her own success while learning to celebrate mine, proving that growth and change weren't limited by age or circumstances, but only by willingness to challenge comfortable assumptions about what was possible. More broadly, my success had created ripple effects throughout our extended community. 3 of my high school classmates had enrolled in community college after hearing about my Harvard acceptance. Mrs. Martinez's grandson had started taking computer programming class. 2 of my cousins had applied for scholarships they'd previously assumed they weren't qualified for. But perhaps the most significant change was in the conversations that happened around kitchen tables and family gatherings in our neighborhood. Instead of discussing education as something for other people's children, families were beginning to explore what might be possible for their own kids. Instead of treating academic achievement as suspicious or threatening, community members were starting to see it as a path to creating opportunities for everyone. The next morning, as my family prepared to return to Phoenix, and I packed for my move to Stanford to begin my PhD in computer science, my mother and I had one final conversation about the future. "What are your plans after you finish your doctoral degree?" she asked. "I want to start a company that develops cybersecurity solutions specifically for small businesses, schools, and community organizations. I want to take the research I'm doing and make it accessible to the people who need protection, but can't afford the expensive systems that big corporations use. And personally, do you think you'll stay in academia, or move to the private sector?" I thought about the question seriously before answering. "I think I want to do both. Teach and research part-time, run a company part-time, Maybe do consulting work that helps other first-generation students navigate the transition to elite institutions, like a bridge between the academic world and the community world. Exactly like that. I want to make sure that the knowledge and opportunities I've gained access to don't stay trapped in elite spaces. I want to use them to create more opportunities for people who come from backgrounds like ours. My mother smiled, and there was something peaceful about her expression that I hadn't seen in years. You know what I've learned during my own educational journey? Success isn't about escaping where you come from. It's about gaining the tools to transform where you come from into something better. As I watched my family's plane disappear into the Boston sky later that afternoon, I realized that the most expensive lesson from this entire experience hadn't been about tuition or living expenses or research costs. It had been about the price of underestimating people, the cost of projecting limitations onto others, and the value of discovering that possibilities expand when they're shared rather than hoarded. My mother's initial accusation of cheating had been painful, but it had also been transformative. It had forced both of us to examine our assumptions about merit, opportunity, and what success looked like for people from our community. It had challenged us to grow beyond the comfortable boundaries of what we'd always believed was possible. The phone call from Harvard had been life-changing, but not just because of the educational and career opportunities it had provided. It had been life-changing because it had proven that excellence could emerge from unexpected places, that talent wasn't limited by zip codes or family income, and that institutions were beginning to recognize the value of diverse perspectives and experience. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that respect isn't inherited or granted as a favor. It's earned through the courage to pursue your potential even when the people you love most can't initially envision the same possibilities you see for yourself. As I prepared to begin the next phase of my academic journey at Stanford, I carried with me not just the technical knowledge and research skills I'd developed at Harvard, but also the understanding that true success is measured not by personal achievement, but by your ability to create opportunities for others to achieve their own potential. The girl who had been accused of cheating her way through community college was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that the greatest achievement isn't reaching the top of any particular mountain, but using your position on that mountain to help others find their own paths upward. The most expensive lesson had been learned not by me, but by anyone who had ever underestimated what was possible when intelligence, determination, and opportunity align. And the tuition for that lesson had been paid in full through the recognition that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.